Alright, YouTube, now for part 2 of this sort of bringing everybody up to date on my literary works. I also did already write a work on plants and herbalism and gardening as well. Fruits of Eden, Herbalism and the Occult, which had a long and harried situation in regards to its release. There was a publisher working on it. That publisher became defunct. This delayed me by almost a year. It was a difficult issue for all. There were people at a time that were very, very mad at what had happened. Thankfully, it appears that they were reimbursed the amount that they were owed by the defunct publisher, and so I guess there's no bad blood there. I ended up self-publishing the work. Now I've self-published, basically everything that I've released, and I'm happy for that. It just made sense. It allows me to work on my own timetable, and there's no middleman drawing money from it for paperback releases. Hardcover's different. It's a totally different story. It's out of my means to create a fine binding edition of anything that I create. Fruits of Eden, though, it goes beyond just like a gardening hand guide. It does cover that. It covers the basics of constructing some simple beds, arrangements of different plants and so forth. It does go into the concept of growing things. However, it also goes into a little bit of encyclopedic content about the spiritual and sometimes antiquated use of certain plants around the world. A lot of it's taken from Appalachian and native lore, some of it from like ancient Greece, ancient Rome. A handful of entries come more from the Hindu path. As far as how some of these various herbs and flowers and woods and fungi and so forth were used over time, it contains a section on psychedelic usage. Obviously, that had to be thrown in because of its importance with shamanism. And it also goes a little bit into the history of the occult in the very first section in regards to sort of the rise of the old guard mentality of the occult using a new method, which is quite strictly the internet. Specifically, it's opened up the world to this kind of material. It also talks about creating certain dyes, inks, using botanical means. It talks about the crafting, for instance. A great example that is often never spoken of, mullein. Mullein was used as an anti-asthmatic by Native Americans. It's also seen as spiritually important in other ways, protective specifically. It can be used as toilet paper. It's got nice, soft, fuzzy leaves. It can also be, if you dry it and you take off the husk, the outer coating of the stem, which is quite woody, you can actually carve the inner segments. They're like strings. You can actually turn them into candle wicks. So if you're into a naturalistic sort of spiritual practice and you're trying to make candles or something, well, there you go. It's as easy as that. And mullein will grow anywhere. It's a pestilent weed. It grows in the middle of the lawn all the time. Unless you're blasting your lawn with chemicals, you will have mullein growing in it. It's quite a nice plant, too. It puts us this huge, huge yellow spike of little flowers. It produces, must be hundreds of thousands of seeds per plant. And it seems to grow gigantic no matter where it's growing, so no problems there. If you don't have a green thumb, you can probably grow mullein. Just get a few seeds, put them out there in the fall. In the spring, they'll be coming up, and they'll put up their spikes, and you'll have more mullein, and then you'll never get rid of it. You can also turn the stems into a wand, as I've done. Specifically, if you take this stem, and you lop off the flowering part, and you sort of take a knife, not one that's too sharp or else you might cut through the actual stem itself. You take a slightly dull knife, and you just run it up and down the stem and knock the leaves off. Then you put it in the sun, let it dry. And then you have to take sandpaper, and you actually have to go up and down the entire length of it. Why? Because the little spines on it, when inhaled, they are mildly irritating. I assume this is the same way in which it works as an anti-asthmatic. Somehow, I'm not sure. I have tried it before. It does actually work. I can't give you medical advice and say you should try that for yourself, and I certainly, if you're using an inhaler, that's what you should use. But that is the traditional usage, or at least one of the traditional usages. Once it is dried in the sun and turns brown, you can get all those hairs off. It's very, very smooth. It's like balsam wood. It's a little bit stronger, honestly, than balsam. It's also very, very light. It's quite attractive. The stem has a tendency to be extremely straight with just a few little nodules on it that make it look stylized. It just looks good. And it's quite strong. It's quite durable. The outer woody coating doesn't flake over time. And I go through and I talk about these things for a number of different plants. talking about growing them, what conditions they typically grow in. For some of them, of course, they wouldn't grow in this climate. Some of them, you're talking about plants that are tropical, they're desert dwelling, they're rainforest dwelling. Morning glory, yes, you can grow morning glory here as an annual. But because our season is so short, typically you're not going to get any of the psychedelic seeds from them, unless you're talking about the non-psychedelic variety, like the Grandpa Ott's purple or something like that. As far as the heavenly blue, the pearly gates, and the flying saucers, good luck unless you started them indoors about 6 weeks before the last frost, or something along those lines. But yeah, I wrote this book quite some time ago. It's actually, other than Sickness and Hell, it's my favorite of my works that I've worked on. Because this was sort of the first truly full-length work. Morbid Stories is a compilation of shorter materials. Psychedelic Spirituality, After the Ashes, they're full length, but they're not as long. Fruits of Eden's around 200 pages, not around 120 or 130 like Psychedelic Spirituality. I believe is 138 if I remember correctly. After the Ashes like 120 or somewhere around there. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I studied the source files because, of course, I've already written them. They've already been available for more than a year. But Fruits of Eden is more of a full-length work. I will be, in the near future, reformatting its cover. I'm re-standardizing everything that I'm doing with my literary works, but it's going to be a long process, and it'll never go down. It's just that, you know, if you don't purchase it within the next month or so, it'll have a different style cover. One that, honestly, will be more close to the format that I use for all of the other works. But I would vouch for it, partially because I wrote it, partially because it combines the encyclopedic sort of botanical info that a lot of herbalistic works contain, with some of the philosophy as well as with the hands-on. I wanted to fuse these things together because no other work really did properly fuse them together. There was no cohesive work unless you're talking about rather large volumes that typically ruminate more on the scientific, let's face it, than the spiritual. There were no other sort of competing titles at the time that I wrote this. I don't think there still are. As far as something that combines all of those aspects together. So if you're interested in the botanical, the sort of gardening and psychedelics and historical maybe side of botanical lore as it relates to the spiritual, yeah, I've already written that work. And Spirits of the Garden was sort of a short booklet primer that came out about a month before Fruits of Eden, sort of as a teaser, sort of as a different work, and also it would be worth reading, I suppose. That one is more just encyclopedic content as well. That's about all. Peace out.